Oceancrest. A quaint little town nestled along the coast, Oceancrest was a symphony of sights, sounds, and sensations. Ethan Carter, a young man with sun-kissed skin and the laid-back demeanor of someone who lived life by the tides, loved his hometown. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Tourists and locals alike strolled along the boardwalk. The aroma of popcorn, cotton candy, and fried dough filled the air. Ethan was closing up his father's surf shop, the familiar routine calming in its predictability. He was about to head home when a piercing scream, raw and desperate, cut through the air. He paused, heart pounding. Another scream, then another. The sounds were getting closer, more frantic. He stepped out of the shop, peering down the boardwalk. A group of people, their movements jerky and unnatural, stumbled towards him. Panic seized Ethan. His mind, still clinging to the normalcy of moments ago, struggled to process the scene unfolding before him. This wasn't a drunken brawl. He stumbled back, tripping over a stray surfboard. The creatures, drawn by the sound, turned towards him. Ethan scrambled to his feet, adrenaline flooding his system. He had to get out, find safety. Then he saw it. Wave Cave, the old arcade where he'd spent countless hours as a kid. Without hesitation, Ethan sprinted towards the arcade, the creatures closing in behind him. Reaching the arcade, he slammed against the glass doors, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. The arcade was dark, the only light coming from the flashing screens of dormant games. Several figures huddled in the shadows, their eyes wide with fear. Ethan, his chest heaving, fumbled with the lock, finally throwing the doors open. Inside, a handful of survivors had already barricaded the entrance.
Hey, you made it, thank God.
We need to secure the place better. They're getting smarter.
Are they gone?
I can't find my boyfriend. Has anyone seen him?
And then there was Jules, a young tourist separated from her boyfriend in the chaos, her face streaked with tears. The faces that turned to greet him were a mixture of relief and terror. Ethan joined the small group, his heart pounding in his chest. They were trapped, surrounded by the walking dead.
Any more out there? Ethan shook his head, unable to speak past the lump in his throat.
We've got some food from the back, but it won't last long. No power, no way to call for help.
Reggie thinks there might be an emergency radio at the bait shop down by the pier. If we could get it working, maybe we could call for help.
Ethan's gaze fell on the rusty crowbar Maya held in her hand. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Ethan's shoulders. The crowbar felt cold and alien in his hand. He looked at the faces around him. Maya's steely determination, Reggie's grim acceptance, Tyler's barely concealed terror, and Jules's desperate hope. They were counting on him.
Be careful out there, Carter.
Stick to the shadows, son.
Ethan took a deep breath, steeling himself for what awaited him outside. The boardwalk, bathed in the eerie glow of a waning moon, was a scene straight out of a nightmare. Overturned food carts lay scattered like fallen soldiers. Souvenir stands, once overflowing with trinkets and treasures, were now silent sentinels of a bygone era. Ethan moved cautiously, his senses on high alert. The crowbar felt heavy in his hand, a meager defense against the creatures that hunted by sound and scent. As he passed the funhouse, a sudden sound made him freeze. Laughter, high-pitched and maniacal, echoed from within the distorted facade. He knew that laughter wasn't born of joy. It was the sound of madness, of a mind unhinged. The inside of the funhouse was a sensory overload. Distorted mirrors reflected grotesque images, the remnants of shattered laughter echoing off the cracked glass.
Welcome to the greatest show on Earth, a spectacle of thrills, chills, and unspeakable horrors.
Ethan's hand tightened around the crowbar, his heart pounding against his ribs. He knew this man, or at least, he knew who he used to be. Mr. Langley, the owner of Neptune's Cove, the town's beloved aquarium. Now, he was just another casualty of the outbreak, his mind twisted into something monstrous.
I feed them. The ocean takes what it's owed.
Ethan felt a surge of terror, cold and paralyzing. He was trapped at the mercy of a madman who saw human life as nothing more than fodder for his aquatic pets. Langley approached him, a manic glint in his eyes. In his hand, he held a long, hooked pole, the kind used to feed the sharks. Ethan knew what was coming. He closed his eyes, bracing himself for the inevitable. But the blow never came. Instead, he heard a splash, a startled cry. He opened his eyes to see Langley struggling in the shark tank, the hooked pole slipping from his grasp. Ethan stumbled out of the funhouse, the echoes of Langley's screams and the shark's frenzied thrashing still ringing in his ears. The salt air, usually invigorating, felt heavy, suffocating. He leaned against a nearby booth, his stomach churning. He had faced death before, had felt the hot breath of the infected on his neck. But this was different. He needed a moment, a breath to steady his nerves, to convince himself that the world hadn't completely lost its mind. As he caught his breath, another sound, faint but distinct, reached his ears. Ethan's head snapped up. He knew that cry. It belonged to little Timmy, a boy from the trailer park on the outskirts of town. He'd often seen him playing on the beach with his dog, a scruffy mutt named Sparky. Now, the sound of the boy's terror sent a chill down his spine. He pushed himself away from the booth, his weariness forgotten. He ran towards the pier, his heart pounding in his chest. The fog was rolling in, thick and heavy, shrouding the pier in an eerie silence. As he neared the lighthouse, he saw him. A lone figure, silhouetted against the fog-shrouded moon, stood at the edge of the pier. "Let him go!" Ethan roared, his voice hoarse with exertion and anger. The figure turned, and Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't one of the infected. Its movements weren't those of the mindless undead. This was something far more sinister, a perversion of humanity that chilled him to the bone.
"The sea demands a sacrifice," Captain Briggs rasped, his voice ragged as if unused for days. "The plague, it's a punishment for our sins. Only the pure can appease the wrath of the ocean gods."
"Let him go, Captain," Ethan pleaded, his voice shaking. "He's just a boy. He doesn't understand."
"He's innocent. He's the key to appeasing the gods. Don't you see? It's the only way to stop this madness."
Ethan felt a surge of anger, hot and consuming. He knew there was no reasoning with a madman, not when his madness was fueled by fear and desperation. He had to act, had to find a way to save Timmy from the clutches of this deranged old man. He lunged forward, the crowbar feeling heavy in his hand. Captain Briggs saw him coming and shoved Timmy aside, the boy stumbling and falling onto the fog-slick planks of the pier. Ethan didn't hesitate. He swung the crowbar with all his might, aiming for the old man's head. But Captain Briggs was quicker than he looked. He dodged the blow, the crowbar whistling past his ear. He grabbed Ethan by the arm, his grip surprisingly strong. Ethan, his chest heaving, watched as the fog swallowed Captain Briggs, the old man's cries swallowed by the roar of the waves. The sea was a merciless force, indifferent to the lives it consumed. His stomach churned. He had taken a life, had ended a man's existence, even a life consumed by madness. The weight of his actions pressed heavily on his soul. Timmy, his eyes wide with terror, scrambled to his feet. The boy's innocence was shattered, replaced by a fear that no child should ever know. He ran towards Ethan, his small arms wrapping around his legs. Ethan held him close, the boys trembling, a stark reminder of the fragility of life, the ever-present threat that lurked in the shadows of their shattered world. "It's okay, Timmy," Ethan murmured, his voice hoarse. "It's over now. You're safe." He wasn't sure if he was reassuring the boy or himself. He lifted Timmy into his arms, the boy clinging to him like a lifeline. The weight of the child was a comforting presence, grounding him in the reality of their situation. He could see the lights of the arcade in the distance, a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. The lights were a promise of safety, a glimmer of hope in their bleak world. They weren't safe, not yet. But for the first time since the nightmare began, Ethan dared to hope. The journey ahead was fraught with danger, but they had each other, and that was enough to keep going. The fog began to lift slightly, revealing the path ahead. Ethan took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. With Timmy in his arms, Ethan took the first step towards the distant lights, his heart filled with a newfound determination. They would survive this, no matter what. The future was uncertain, but for now, they had hope. And sometimes, hope was all you needed to keep moving forward. As they walked towards the lights, Ethan felt a sense of peace wash over him. They had survived the worst, and together, they would face whatever came next. The lights of the arcade grew brighter, a symbol of hope in the darkness. They were not alone, and that made all the difference. They weren't safe, not yet. But for the first time since the nightmare began, Ethan dared to hope. They weren't safe, not yet. But for the first time since the nightmare began, Ethan dared to hope. The arcade, once a place of laughter and carefree abandon, was now a fortress, a last stand against the encroaching darkness. The air inside was thick with tension, the smell of sweat and fear mingling with the stale scent of popcorn and old pizza. Ethan, his clothes torn and bloodied, his face etched with exhaustion and a weariness that went beyond the physical, relayed the events of the night. The others listened in silence, their faces grim. They had all seen too much, lost too much.
The radio's working. Picked up a distress signal. Coast Guard cutter about 20 miles offshore. They're picking up survivors.
A collective gasp filled the air. Hope, fragile but real, flickered in their eyes. Escape, a chance at survival, was within their grasp. But the realization was immediately followed by a chilling question.
How do we get to them? The beach is crawling with those things. We'd never make it.
The weight of their predicament settled upon them, heavy and suffocating. Every breath felt like a struggle, every heartbeat a reminder of the peril they faced. The radio crackled with static, a constant reminder of the lifeline that hung just out of reach. They clung to the hope that somewhere, someone was listening, ready to offer a lifeline. They had a way out, but the path was fraught with danger, a gauntlet of teeth and claws, and the relentless hunger of the undead. Every step forward was a gamble with their lives. Ethan studied the map spread out on the counter, his mind racing. He traced the route with his finger, calculating the risks, weighing their slim chances of survival. The pier. It was their only chance. A beacon of hope amidst the chaos, a place where they could find refuge. They could use the remaining fireworks from the 4th of July celebration, create a diversion, draw the horde away from the pier. It was a risky plan, but it was all they had. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was their only hope. They huddled together, discussing the details, each person contributing to the plan. He looked at the faces around him, saw the fear, the exhaustion, but also the flicker of determination, the will to survive that burned bright even in the face of overwhelming odds. They were a team, bound by their shared struggle. He knew what he had to do. The decision weighed heavily on him, but there was no other way. "I'll create the diversion," he said, his voice firm, resolute. He saw the doubt in their eyes, but knew he had to be the one to take the risk. He wouldn't let them down. He couldn't afford to. He wouldn't let their sacrifices be in vain. Every loss they had suffered would be honored by his actions. He would give them their chance, even if it meant sacrificing his own. His resolve was unshakable. The others started to protest, but Ethan silenced them with a look. His eyes conveyed a silent plea for understanding. "It's our only shot," he said, his voice raspy but unwavering. "Don't waste it." He needed them to believe in the plan as much as he did. He wouldn't let them argue. There was no time for debate. He wouldn't let them talk him out of it. His mind was made up, and his heart was set. This was his burden to bear, his sacrifice to make. He walked towards the danger, knowing that his actions would give them a fighting chance. The roar of the explosion echoed across the shattered remnants of Oceancrest, a fiery testament to one man's sacrifice. The once bustling town, now reduced to smoldering ruins, bore silent witness to the ultimate price paid for a fleeting chance at survival. The shockwave rippled through the air, tossing aside the remaining undead like rag dolls caught in a hurricane. The force of the blast was a brutal reminder of the chaos that had engulfed their world, a world where the living fought desperately against the relentless tide of the dead. On the pier, splintered and ablaze, there was nothing left of Ethan but ashes and the lingering scent of gunpowder. His final stand had been a beacon of hope, a moment of defiance against the encroaching darkness, now reduced to mere cinders. On the deck of the Coast Guard cutter, the survivors huddled together, their faces pale and drawn in the harsh glare of the ship's lights. Each face told a story of loss and resilience, of battles fought and loved ones left behind. The salt spray stung their eyes, but they didn't look away from the sight of Oceancrest burning in the distance. The flames danced on the horizon, a cruel reminder of the life they had been forced to abandon. The town, once their haven, now a pyre consuming their past, their memories. It was a place where they had found solace and community, now transformed into a blazing inferno that devoured everything they had known. Maya, her hand clutching the barbed wire bat, now a useless symbol of a fight already lost, stared at the flames, her eyes dry and filled with a grief too deep for tears. The bat, once a tool of survival, now felt like a relic from a world that no longer existed. Reggie, his face etched with a lifetime of hard-won wisdom, placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, his gruff voice failing him. He had seen too much, lost too many, and now words seemed inadequate to bridge the chasm of their shared sorrow. Tyler, still clutching the plastic toy gun, a pathetic talisman against the horrors he'd witnessed, sobbed silently, his body racked with a grief he couldn't comprehend. The toy, once a source of innocent joy, now felt like a cruel mockery of the world they lived in. Jules, her face streaked with tears, looked away, unable to bear the sight of the town that had promised so much, only to deliver them into a nightmare. The dreams of a safe haven had been shattered, leaving only the harsh reality of their struggle for survival. The Coast Guard crew, their faces grim reflections of the horrors they'd witnessed, went about their duties with a practiced efficiency that spoke of too much experience with the aftermath of such tragedies. They had become all too familiar with the cost of survival in this new world. They had seen the worst that humanity could inflict upon itself, had witnessed the fragility of civilization when faced with the unrelenting hunger of the undead. Each mission was a stark reminder of the thin line between life and death. As the cutter steamed away from the burning remnants of Oceancrest, the survivors carried with them the weight of Ethan's sacrifice. His bravery had given them a chance, a fleeting hope in a world gone mad. They would remember him, the young man who had given them their future, who had bought their survival with his own life. His memory would be a beacon, guiding them through the darkness that lay ahead. The dead tide had claimed another victim, but his spirit, like the echo of the explosion that consumed him, would linger in their hearts, a constant reminder of the cost of their freedom. His sacrifice was a testament to the enduring human spirit, even in the face of overwhelming odds. They were alive, but they would never forget the man who had died to give them that chance. In their hearts, Ethan's legacy would live on, a symbol of hope and resilience in a world forever changed.